Welcome to the CFO Track podcast. I'm your host, Tom Hunter, and every week I'll be bringing you stories from some of Australia's best and brightest CFOs and the lessons they learnt along the way. My goal for the podcast is to provide learning and development opportunities for those wanting to get to the level of the guests on this show, but they just didn't have the access to those lessons otherwise. Let's get into it. Starting hot for season 2, I'm joined by Australian startup royalty, Alexey Mitko. Alexey was a key part behind the growth of Canva, Koala, and was the founding CFO at Eucalyptus. He's since gone into the VC world with CoVentures. Alexey shares some brilliant insights around building a finance function for scale, and then what you need to do to get your business ready to raise capital. It's also a fantastic perspective to hear what VC funds look for when they're investing. It's a great episode, and I think you'll love it. So here we go. Alexey Mitko, welcome to the CFO Track podcast. How are you?
Good. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. How's the week been?
Yeah, good. I am, as you know, learning the ropes in VC space after my stint as a founder. So lots to learn every week.
Yeah, nice. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty excited about this one, getting Australian startup royalty on the show.
I didn't know I had that title, but it's all.
We can plug it off the back of this. So I've already given the listeners a bit of an intro and a bit of background about yourself, but I never do it justice. So it'd be good to hear it from yourself, where you're at now, what sort of stuff you're doing.
Yes, sure. At the moment, I'm partner at CoVentures, which is a pre-seed VC fund here in Sydney. And I haven't been here long. Before that, I was founder at Eucalyptus, which is a telehealth business. Before that, I was at Koala. And before that, I was at Canva. And prior to that, I had a stint at a public practice. So it's been a long journey and very short once you reflect upon it.
Yeah, awesome. So the whole idea behind the podcast is to give up and coming finance professionals that access to the mentorship or access to the learning and development opportunities that they might not have otherwise. So we'll go back to the start and go through it a little bit. So why did you get into accounting? Why did you get into finance? How did that all happen?
Yeah, I think like most people kind of fell into it. So when I went to uni in the US, I didn't really know what accounting is like as a profession.
Yeah.
But I did a generalist business degree, and one of the courses was Introduction to Accounting 101.
Okay. Yep.
And in one of those courses, kind of light bulb turned on where I was like thinking to myself, I'm actually not too bad at this. And it's actually interesting.
Yeah.
So there was an initial flirting with the profession. But my degree was in accounting. So I graduated, I started working in startups, and that's probably where the realization came on me, how important accounting is within the business.
Yeah.
I was working in startup in US, and looking back, there were a lot of red flags, but I wasn't in a position where I could see the finances of the business. And because of it, when the business eventually closed down, it came somewhat of a surprise to me. And looking at that experience, I figured out that actually two things are interesting. One is that startups allows you to punch above your experience level. So there is nobody there to tell you that you shouldn't tackle certain projects if you think they're important, because everybody is short on time. So initiative matters.
Yeah.
Delivery of results matter. So that was a great feeling. And then secondly, I realized that you better know accounting if you want to run a business or be involved in any significant capacity. One is because you understand what's happening throughout the organization. And two is much easier to negotiate your salary when you know when everybody else is getting paid. I reflected, I decided I wanted to do something specialized to bring that skill. And that kind of brought me to Sydney, where I did my master's of professional accounting.
Yeah, nice.
And started working in startups here in Tankstream Labs.
Yeah, nice. And so that was by the accounting firm, that's what you're saying?
No, that was not the accounting firm. I jumped back into the startups, but kind of as a operations manager with all the responsibilities of the job, including the taking care of the finances. But what I quickly realized is that what you learn at school and how to make make journals for remediation of mines is not
Yeah, yeah,
necessarily what you need practically as you actually run the business. So that startup hasn't gone well, but it was based in TimeStream Labs, as I mentioned,
yeah,
and it's a co-working space. And just so happens there was an accounting firm on the same floor, actually like
yeah,
two rows of
yeah,
desks down the hall that specialized in providing accounting services to startups.
yeah.
So I
Okay.
just
Did
strolled
you need an
over.
interview, or did they just see your work on the job and it was?
Well, it was very funny because I just strolled over and said, "Hey, do you guys have a job? Because like I'd
Yeah,
like to work in an accounting firm and learn from like actual accountants." And they said, "Well, surprisingly enough, one of our bookkeepers is going on maternity leave in 2 days."
perfect,
Or like
perfect.
gave
Yeah,
her notice, and it just so happens that they they wasn't advertised job, but
yeah,
the
okay.
circumstances smiled on me, so I went into that role. And we can talk about cloud accounting in a
Yeah,
sec.
nice. Yeah, absolutely. And so what do you think was the major differences going into an accounting firm after spending a bit of time in commercial? Because it's not the typical step.
Yeah. Well, one is that you get to talk to professionals, a professional accountant with many years of experience. And
Yeah,
that's like extremely valuable because you can soak up so much stuff much quicker. And some stuff in commercial you'll never be exposed to. It was at the time when cloud accounting has been nascent and
sure.
Zero was just popping up. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
particular firm didn't have a document room. Everything was cloud, everything was digital. I know it sounds funny nowadays, but like everything, all good stories needed to start somewhere.
What
So it
year
was
was this?
2012 or something
Okay,
like
all
that.
right. Yeah, okay, interesting.
So it was great to be on that frontier and learn from people who were pushing that frontier.
Yeah, yeah.
The reverse side of it is that you are selling a service and a service that needs to be repetitive and you have to deliver it to many different clients to a high quality of standard. So it can become fairly routine quickly. And once you've learned the job, you don't get to move on to learn the next job. You need to be doing the job that you're assigned. Right.
Yeah,
So that's something that didn't sit well with me because I'm coming from an environment where any project you want to do, you can tackle and go and learn to an environment where there is great wealth of expertise, but the
mm,
way it's dished out is in small increments because the model of professional services firm demands it.
yeah, gotcha.
So after a while, I decided that I've learned as much as I could. It's time for me to find another commercial role.
Yeah, right. And that's when the Canva role came up?
Yeah, well, Canva at the time was a tiny little startup in Surrey Hills with 20 people.
20 people. We only person in finance?
No, there was another accountant there,
Yep. Above
and
you?
yes, on the same level
Okay.
as
Yep.
me.
Yep.
And then there was a small external accountant at the time.
Yep. Yep.
But
What
that
was what was the vibe like then compared to?
the vibe in Canva or the
Yeah,
vibe in
yeah. What
accounting,
was the business structure like, or what was
it
happening at
was.
the time?
I mean, it was very very flat. Of course, I reported into Cliff, but the general sense was that it is moving quickly.
Mm,
It's fair to say.
yeah.
And there are some things that about speed that are good, right? Number of users, the revenue coming through the door,
Yeah.
the ambition is constantly getting bigger and bigger. And can start seeing how you're on a precipice of entering into the big leagues. So
Mm,
that was all very, very exciting, but also speed comes with strain on many, many functions, not only accounting related functions. As you can imagine, accounting touches parts of legal, parts of contract management, parts of HR roles, because if you're running payroll, you need to onboard people
mm,
through the contracts that they have signed as they were recruited, right? So in Canva, my role really started to kind of develop horizontally. So I started taking care of early HR function, early legal function, early finance and analytics function.
yeah. So on that, so how do you know when the business needs it, or obviously it needs it, but what are the symptoms and what are the triggers? You go, we need to actually build something here because there's nothing.
Well, as you walk into the office and you ask what that pile of paper is on the floor
Yeah,
and they tell you
yeah,
that's ESOP contracts for all the employees, you start saying, maybe there's a little bit of thought that needs to be put into this. But like
sure.
things break. So if you have employees that are joining and they're not getting their offers out quickly and they're complaining, if they join and they don't have a laptop on their first day, that's a problem,
Yep.
right? So it's a multitude of kind of small things breaking.
Mm,
And the good thing about startups is that anyone can pick it up. So I just so happens that I said, well, hey, this is a problem I know how to fix because I've seen in interactive accounting, I used to do payroll for a number of clients, but I've seen how inefficient system in the upstream really hamper the quality of your work downstream. And it was a great frustration of mine in that environment because you are paid only for running payroll. You're not paid for fixing the HR and
yeah,
onboarding processes. But here I could do it. Like there was
yeah,
nobody
yeah.
else to say, no, it's my role. And even if there was somebody who was assigned to this particular area, if I came in and said, hey, I can help, they'll be like, excellent.
Okay.
And through that process, I would learn something new.
Yeah. So did you put your hand up to do those sort of things, or did it just get thrusted upon you and the nature of startup land?
I don't think that there is a kind of a meeting where everybody says, now this is your responsibility. Because the problem is defining responsibility. It's very hard to say what goes into that particular function or not, especially if you're not functional expert,
Yep.
right? So in many cases, kind of the rule that I followed is if it's helped me improve the function of finance,
Yep.
I would go upstream as much as I possibly could,
Yeah.
depending on obviously on the time commitments. But
Yeah.
in a lot of those cases, the things that are required to do things nice and cleanly don't necessarily take more time. They
Mm,
might take a little bit more coordination. They might take a little bit more investment in in a software tool, or whatever that might
yep.
be. Um, Luckily, in interactive accounting, I've learned all the cloud software tools around. So that was a big boost to efficiency and clarity in that business initially. But yeah, I don't recall then somebody said,
Yeah.
hey, we need a document management system
Sure.
or we need to take care of legal stuff. It was more along the lines of like, hey, I need to do accruals for the month and I
Yeah.
have no idea where the documents are.
Did you have a background in legal or HR or anything like that?
No, I mean, HR, I do now.
Yeah.
Decades plus working in
Yep.
startups. But I guess the way one of my colleagues, I think he was potentially on your podcast previously, Ben.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he mentioned that he turned into a bush lawyer after years and years of doing this. And this is, I think, is a great way to put it. Is like you don't need background because doing something where there is nothing is an infinite improvement. And in the early stages, process work is very similar to accounting work. You're obviously trying to tap particular legal firms for specialty
Mm,
things,
yeah.
potentially reviewing your employment agreement, setting up transfer pricing
Yeah.
agreements, all that kind of stuff. So there is a level of legal work that you can always pay for. But the difficult part, I think, is integrating that expertise into the operations of the business in a way that lasts more than a few months.
Yeah. Sure. So how long were you there? It was like 2.5-ish
Yeah,
years.
2.5 years.
What was the growth like during that period? 20 to what?
The company growth, we went from 20 people to 200,
Yeah. Wow.
250, and we
Yeah.
opened the Philippines office, which I've been heavily involved in. So the company and the user count, I think I was there when they just started the million. I think when I was leaving, there's maybe 10 million of
Yeah.
users or
Wow.
something like that.
Okay.
So the business growth was extremely rapid, which is funny to say now, right? Because it's been
Yeah.
extremely rapid
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
all the subsequent years.
And
But
so and so how quickly did the business outgrow those functions that you were building for HR and payroll?
if I just go back a little bit on the growth,
Yeah,
because
please.
there's another track of growth that happens, which is your professional growth.
Yeah.
And I think in that period of time, what I realized that I was hitting the limits of my ability to learn,
Mm,
because business was outpacing what it needed, to what I could provide. It would take me maybe 2 or 3 weeks to figure out a particular decision, while the business needed for me to
yeah,
figure it out in a day. And
yeah,
subsequently, in my future businesses, experience does matter. Now I can sort things a lot quicker because I know people to call, I know the scope
yeah,
of work we provide, I
yeah,
know the rough pricing, I know the sequence of rolling out certain things. So that was at what I was faced with at that point in time. And that was one of the reasons that I decided to leave Canva, is to see if the magic of Canva was rubbing off on me, or I actually built
yeah.
a
Okay.
skill in that area. Uh,
Was that a hard call?
no, I think once I realized that in order for me to learn better, I had to change the place where I was at,
Yeah,
became very easy. It was definitely difficult to articulate in a moment as to what are the different feelings and things that are guiding me. But
mm,
in retrospect, a it was a fairly easy call to make, because always in my career, I leaned towards places where I could learn. Financial incentive wise, probably bad call, but the hindsight is a different way.
yeah. No, fair enough. And so you moved to Koala. That would have been at a pretty similar phase to when you joined it
Yeah, that's
in
right.
Canberra, I would have thought.
I joined Koala when there were about 20 people as well.
Yeah, okay, right.
It was a similar environment, right? So that business grew very, very, very quickly. I think in the 2 years that I've been there, we grew the business from about 10 million revenue to about 100. So very rapid, similar stuff with overseas office expansion. So we opened an office in
Yeah,
Japan. There was a lot of things that I could sort in a day. So when I joined, the zero file was breaking down because they were piping so many transactions through it. I mean,
yeah,
familiar problem if you're an
yeah,
accountant and you have a specialize in startups. You just need to aggregate and do daily
yeah.
or monthly journals, not a problem. But they were in a bind in that sense of word. And then once again, some things that would take me weeks prior now were sorted in a day. Very easy to introduce the employee options plan, very easy to set up an HR system, very easy to kind of create document management and all of those supporting processes. So I felt a lot of satisfaction in the fact that I knew how to do early stage startup operations in a better way.
Mm,
But there were some challenges there as well, because I've come from SaaS
yeah.
businesses, and Koala was heavily inventory based business. So I've,
Was that a steep learning curve?
yes,
Yeah.
I think I've underestimated how difficult it would be to
Yeah.
understand the peculiarities of that business, but humbling once you went through it. And I've had the good fortune of being able to work with some. I think one of the accountants that we hired was in his
Okay. Yep.
so and used to work in chemical plant as
Yeah, okay.
an accountant.
Yeah, no.
So his experience has helped me enormously to wrap my head around Koala. Koala's operations, for example, in a chemical plant, you would have chemicals evaporating or
Yeah.
shrinking or mixing and in different proportions. So there was a very complex costing system behind that. And we've
Mm,
tried to replicate it in certain aspects of
yeah,
Koala.
okay. Was that the most difficult part to pick up? The costing
Within a business
component?
like that, I think that was one. And the second one, I was fortunate enough to meet Tim and Charlie, my co-founders in subsequent
Yeah.
Eucalyptus.
Yeah.
One of the things that was really cool to see, not difficult necessarily to pick up, but one of the biggest learning experiences is how do you run a digital marketing function internally at scale? Because it's almost like a high octane engine where you spend a lot of money and a lot of that money comes back very quickly, but you need to be certain that the spends that you are making throughout that process are sharp enough to bring money back. And you have to
Yeah,
do it
yeah.
every single month.
Yeah. And so how did it come to an end? Because you were there for a couple of years and you said you met Charlie and Tim there. At what point were you thinking, you know what, we should do something together? Let's start it.
Yes, yes. So Tim and Charlie were kind of the originators of that idea, and they had another co-founder, Benny, in the
Yep.
mix. Wasn't that
Yep.
Koala, but everybody thinks that he was by now.
Yeah.
And they decided to. I wasn't necessarily very happy at Koala because there was a lot of responsibility, and we've done great work, but not necessarily recognized as such.
Sure.
I've decided that I wanted to move on, and in Koala, I was financial controller, and I was looking for my next CFO role because I felt that I am at the stage of responsibility, which basically done everything at the
Yeah.
early
Yeah. Yeah.
startup. So CFO should be my next thing. And I've been interviewing in a number of Sydney startups at the time. But something about the idea of Tim's resonated with me, which is originally Eucalyptus was to be a central core of expertise that incubates and helps others to bring their products to market, essentially. And one of those particular points is that it's kind of a central organization, but it has expertise in accounting, logistics, operation, HR, a lot of those things that I knew quite a great deal about.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself that that would be an ideal environment to perfect them because I can
Yeah.
do them time and time again. And it would really solidify my playbook on kind of building early stage businesses. So I was attracted to that idea versus just joining a single business
Yep.
and looking after
Yeah.
it
Nice.
for the duration.
So your first CFO role was also as a founder CFO.
That's right.
What was the imposter syndrome like at that point? Coming in, you must have
Uh,
been.
none. And the reason why is that there was probably one day of accounting and finance that I
Yeah.
had to actually do.
Yeah.
Once you figure out the structure, like there's a payroll to run and maybe
Yeah.
one or two
Yeah. Yeah.
bookkeeping entries to do. So like all the basic operations were extremely simple in the beginning, right? So that allowed me time to branch out into other parts of
Yeah.
organization. Legal became a much greater part of
Yep.
my remit because Eucalyptus, one of the first brands that we wanted to launch was Pilot, and that was
Mm.
a medical brand at the time when COVID lockdowns were hitting Australia. So there was quite a bit of work to be done to figure out how to set up that operation from medical legal perspective. So that was fascinating because one day of accounting, 3 days of
Yeah.
three
Yeah.
days
Yeah.
of figuring that out. But once structures are in place, you kind of move on to other jobs that needed to be done. So for a period of time, I was the person answering all the pilot support tickets as
Yep.
well. So customer support came into my remit, and we were fortunate enough to that our product resonated, and we decided to stay in the telehealth space. And that engine that we learned how to build in Koala, Tim and Charlie have re-implemented it in Eucalyptus, and it has been driving a lot of early growth. So over time, my remits or across many different verticals
Mm.
where I was doing a kind of passable but not excellent job
Yeah. Sure.
started to shrink. For the last year and a half, I think, my role essentially meant that I had to hire a specialist into a particular team to head it
Sure.
off
Yep.
every 3 months, essentially.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
HR, legal, analytics, medical, risk,
Yeah.
finance. So
Sure.
I had to do that fairly quickly. So that was an exciting part.
So on that, because a lot of those areas you would have a fair bit of expertise, but you might not be a subject matter expert. So how do you hire into divisions when you don't have a heap of technical experience in that space?
Well, I mean, you do make mistakes occasionally. So
Yeah.
that's a given, and I've made
Nature
my.
of the game.
But I think you quickly realize once you've seen it done a few times that there is a sequence of roles that has to happen in a startup. So, for
Mm.
example, one of the first hires in that environment is that you hire a junior bookkeeper. right? Because they allow you to offload some of the simple but high volume tasks that are starting to creep up.
Hmm.
You don't outsource it, right?
Yep.
Because
Okay.
you have to, that their role changes very quickly. After that has happened, you know that recruitment becomes a big priority for the business, but
Yeah.
you can only hire a single person. So you either hire a recruiter based background, or you
Yeah.
hire HR based background. And you
Yep.
have
Yep.
to be probably doing a trade off and hiring a recruiter, because if they are able to recruit great people, then the HR need is ameliorated for a period of time. Of course, you have to build out that team subsequently. So to answer your question, you don't have expertise officially, but you have expertise operationally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as long as you focus on the end goals, the person that does that job, you can
Hmm.
very quickly see if they're good or not. So in many cases, they weren't, but then probationary period is created for exactly that
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. Gosh.
And in many cases, they were. So one of the people that we hired to help with our risk team, Gus,
Hmm.
he joined our risk team as a junior from a legal firm, and
Hmm.
then he runs one of the biggest biggest businesses within Eucalyptus
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
in a span of like 4 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's how you kind of find talent, and there is space to do that quick learning and uplift for people who are capable to do it. But they are a minority of all the people that you hire. There are some people who are happy with their roles. There are some people who won't be able to learn as quickly as the business requires them to, and that's fine as well. It doesn't mean that they're bad
Sure.
professionals. It
Yeah.
just means that in that particular point in time, their skill set and the needs were mismatched. So they either go as I did in Canva and tackle another challenge with the refresher
Yep.
in an environment that suits them, or they find a role within Eucalyptus, of which there are plenty, that
Hmm.
requires less leadership and more operational excellence. And you need
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, gotcha. So back to the early days of Eucalyptus. So now that you've done it a third time, setting up an early stage finance function, what did you learn from the first couple that you implemented for the third time around, or that you would have done originally if you knew?
Make sure your chart of account matches all the other subsidiaries in your group. Yeah. I think there is a lot of things like that where there are small changes that
Hmm.
have a reverberating impact. So an example of that is I ran payroll fortnightly every 2 weeks in all the businesses that I've been part of. And I've done it because if you leave it to a monthly schedule, you have such a volume of complexity and memory loss in an
Hmm.
organization that functions with lower level of systems that it would be very hard for you to actually run payroll. Just as an example, right? But it makes no sense to run payroll on a fortnightly schedule for a bigger business. It's
Sure.
just like you're doing twice the work
Yeah.
while you
Yeah.
should be doing. But that's because they have all the systems set up that retain the knowledge
Yeah.
of
Okay.
things that have happened
Yep.
throughout that period. So
Yeah.
there's a
Okay.
lot of things like that, including things like um, how to prepare for investor diligence as you go through fundraising rounds. Eucalyptus, we've raised in our early days, we've raised almost every 6 months or
Yeah.
so.
Wow.
So that means that diligence was a thing that you would do almost constantly. It wasn't like that
Hmm.
you would do once every few years. So that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you necessarily need to run your operations differently, but it does mean that, for example, if you onboard engineers, you better know where their IP assignment agreements are,
Yeah.
and put it in a folder ready to be handed over should
Yeah.
diligence come. Or
Yep.
if once again, an engineering area, if you are using external software in your product, have a list of it and don't assume that it exists, right? So there's a lot of things like that where it's like, it doesn't take more time for you to do it right. It actually
Hmm.
clear for
Yeah.
everyone, right? But somebody needs to say, hey, we need to do it in that way. Password management is another example. I know that one password has, and other password management software has
Yeah.
made appearance in the last few years, but in a lot of early startups, they still exchange passwords on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But
Alexey 123.
yeah. And if you continue doing it into the future, it becomes almost impossible to undo. But
Yeah.
it's so much easier to have it and pay for it and know that it's money well spent. And another example is digital cards. So Wise or DVPay or Wheel or whatever,
Mm,
whichever one you fancy. It's been a huge unlock, at least for
mm.
me, in running day-to-day operations, because now I don't have to chase a physical card that's changed five hands and had
Yeah,
five
yeah.
characters that nobody knows about, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things like that that do it properly, quicker,
Yeah,
cheaper, and
yeah.
more.
Makes sense to do it right the first time, right? So how many rounds of funding did you do over those few years?
Uh, I
Yeah,
can look
about
it
5
up,
years? About 6?
but like in my career, it was probably
Or Eucalyptus, more
for
specifically?
Eucalyptus. Yeah, I want to say five
Yeah,
or six.
okay, right.
Yeah.
So what changes for you throughout that? From what you learned from I imagine you did a couple of times prior with Koala and Canva as well. So once you'd started getting the hang of it, like what stuff do you do differently?
Well, one is that funding or fundraising for a startup is not a solitary job. It's a team sport between you and your co-founders. And one of the things that Tim used to say to me, Tim, which is who's a founder at
Mm,
Eucalyptus, he used to say me that there is a time for numbers and then there is a time for sales. And
okay.
that doesn't mean that numbers don't matter or need to be embellished. It just means that you need to provide a version of the business that's possible and that's attractive,
Yeah.
and just state your assumptions. And I
Mm,
think that is very unnatural thing for a lot of account
mm,
because they look at the past and they project by fitting a line onto the
mm.
past. But
Yep.
in reality, a hockey stick growth, you can't you can't extrapolate. It requires a level of, I guess, storytelling and a level of confidence and a level of financial modeling to
Mm,
support that kind of setup. So you do need to realize that there are two modes.
mm,
That being said, once the roles within the team are established for the fundraising
mm.
period, I think we had a very great thing going between myself and the team where he would sell. And then as soon as the term sheet is signed, I would take over and I would close diligence in as quick as time
Yeah.
possible. And
Yeah,
one of
okay.
those things, as we've discussed, is like you just run your operations with the mind that you have to do diligence
Yeah.
frequently.
Yeah.
And that allows you to maintain that momentum through to closing of the round. Because if they start to drag on, and I've experienced that in Koala as well, people start like, I don't want to
No,
say
that makes sense.
the same. I don't want to repeat the same words, but they ring true. Is like time kills all deals, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what do you see as the biggest mistakes for first time capital raising? Like what are the things you need to look out for that are pretty quick wins?
Well, yeah, run your operations. I think role that financial modeling plays in that process is very different
Hmm.
from early stage to latter stages, and you have to understand what that difference is.
Hmm.
In the early stages, it's very much a theoretical process to stress test the thinking of the whole overall founding team and see
Hmm.
that they are analytical enough to understand the moving components, even if you don't know the numbers that ultimately
Yep.
fit into that model.
Yep.
And I think at the latter stages, once you get to Series A or B, it more or less becomes the plan to which you need to run your business. So variances become extremely important if they are unforeseen.
Hmm.
And it becomes a measurement stick of your ability to predict and run your operations. And I think that's a mistake on both sides. So it's a mistakes on internal side when you doing the selling, you know the stage and know the purpose that that tool serves. But I've seen many investors who go into the early stage and they ask for 5-year forecasts.
Yeah.
Their checklist says to ask for 5-year forecasts, and they never go into the details, and they kind of find a particular item within the financial model at seed
Hmm.
stage, say, don't think this one is right. And you're like, well, you know what? All of them are not going to be the numbers that will be there.
Yeah.
subsequently. You just have to have that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at what point did you realize that it was time to move on? Because you'd been there since day
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Eucalyptus specifically, the reality for me is that I excel of doing passable job across a wide range of
Mm,
parts of the business.
yep.
But in Eucalyptus, as it became bigger and bigger, that CFO role started to narrow down.
Yeah.
And in many cases, the output of the work of the function that I was heading was a result of somebody else's work. So
Sure.
when financial statements are prepared, I
Yeah.
can't even make a journal entry into that because my
Yeah.
auditors wouldn't allow me to, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a new feeling. It was a new feeling for me, and the one that I didn't necessarily like because I like to be in the weeds operating. And we were fortunate enough to hire excellent people
Mm,
into the finance function. So our financial controller, Karina, when we hired her, she was excellent. So it felt for me that I would be doing worse job than her, and I would be
mm,
stepping on her toes, trying
yeah.
to
Yeah.
manage the team in the same way that I've been managing. And there are other people that are just better than I am at this level. And they have more interest and they have different motivations and they have different experience. And they've never operated on a early stage, but they've operated on a later stage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I felt like, well, at this point in time, while all the roles and all the teams have their heads off, and obviously they are still learning their respective jobs. As a CFO, there isn't the same job here that I've started with, and it didn't excite me as much. So I decided to let the others take the reins.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that a difficult decision to let go, or do you think it just happened naturally?
No, like I I place very little of my identity into a title. I know that's not the same with everyone, but to me, being a CFO or financial controller or a partner or whatever, it doesn't really matter because the job that I do is needs to be that something that excites me and something
Mm,
to learn. So if those two factors are not present, and somebody else can do it better, then let them do it. Maybe they'll be
yep.
happy, right?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
I would be in that position.
Yeah. Nice. And so, how did you decide what's next after that?
Well, at the time, my second son was born as well. So I have
Yeah.
two
Good
young
timing.
children, two little boys. So I said, well, it's a perfect time. I think like I've hired everybody that I can hire to lead the different teams. And it was a perfect time to focus on the family for a year. During
Nice.
that time, I was still actively angel investing
Okay. Yeah.
just because I'm part of this, I guess, system,
Yeah.
and enjoyed quite a bit doing that because in a lot of cases, my experience of operating on early stages is extremely helpful
Yeah.
for
For sure.
founders that they start off,
Yeah.
especially around the ESOP employee share schemes
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
to roll them out practically has been a big thing that I've done many times. So that was very rewarding, the
Mm,
angel investing route. And then at one point, one of our early investors in Eucalyptus, Maxine, she reached out and said, well, my first fund is almost fully deployed. I'm going to be raising a second fund. Would you like to join as a partner? And I said yes, because a few reasons. One is that the stage of impact is much greater. And Maxine has
mm,
done an excellent job in CoVentures of identifying the space where she operates and doing an excellent job of it. And
mm.
secondly, the deal flow that I get is incomparable to what Maxine in her role would be
Yeah. Yeah.
seeing. So there's a lot more businesses that are quite exciting to see and help. And I just get a kick out of it. And
Yeah.
lastly, our skills are very complementary. So Maxine is excellent saleswoman, and
Yep.
I'm hopefully decent accountant and operator. So a lot of the things that I do now in the fund is kind of
Yeah.
doing a lot of the background work for it.
And now you've seen both sides of it, and you're on the other side of the fence now. What do you think that people within a business that are trying to raise capital aren't aware of would be
Yeah,
helpful?
I think one is that they don't understand different types of capital and they just assume that they need to raise from VC capital. But
Yeah, right.
VC capital is suitable for very specific businesses too. Even if they're suitable for it, they need to be very clear as to how that capital will change the shape of their business. In
Mm,
Eucalyptus, when we were doing it, we knew that we needed VC capital because that quantum, and we knew that that capital means breakneck speed of growth. And we
sure.
were fine with it because
Yeah,
that's the core strategy of that business. But I think a lot of people, when they think raising external capital, they think VC capital without really thinking. And then they don't really do any research
sure.
on the fund itself
Yeah,
and kind of the types of deals that they have done. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind that I've seen many.
yeah. And so what's CoVentures working on at the minute? Like what sort of projects are you working on? How do you see the next couple of years?
Well, we are in the midst of a fundraising for our fund too. I
Okay. Yeah.
realized surprisingly when I joined the fund that the fundraising for a company is a 6 months thing and you
Yep.
can do it quicker.
Yeah.
Fundraising for a fund is up to 24 months.
Yeah,
We
right.
very fortunate that we started in October, so we raised almost half of it now in the span of a very few months. But it's it's a different beast because you have two-sided marketplace almost, right?
Mm,
The LP base that you have to help, and then you have the portfolio companies that you have to help as well. So very different kind of operationally. The economics of the business really start to make sense uh,
yeah.
only in a family of funds.
Mm,
So there's a lot of learnings that I've had in that space, and I'm
yeah.
enjoying it because of it.
Yeah.
It's something new, something that I haven't done before. My founder hat is useful because there's a lot of things that I kind of understand intuitively when I speak to other founders. But
Mm,
that being said, the range of types of businesses that we're seeing is something that haven't experienced before. One day you can be talking about kind of technology to help businesses manage their industrial processes.
mm.
The other time you'll be talking about a social club and kind of what you can build on top of that business. So the range has been inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. And so where do you see things going over the next 3 to 5 years? Not necessarily for the business, but the VC space, this high growth SaaS space. Where do you see things
Yeah.
tracking it?
Yeah. So I think AI is prevalent and we can talk
Yeah.
more about it, but like it's prevalent in the types of businesses that we see. There's always an AI lens on top of it. Whether or not that is over invested in, I don't necessarily know, but we
Mm,
definitely try to look for businesses that are serving customers outside of the AI vertical. So if you are an AI that helps an AI company do something in AI, that becomes
yeah.
challenging for us.
Yeah.
But if you're a business that says, "Hey, it's a new tool that's available to us, and previously that couldn't be done, but now it can be done very cheaply, and because of it, we'll be building a business like that."
Mm,
That's a compelling argument. So I think there'll be a lot of niches that will open up and be more efficient. Yeah. In terms of CoVentures, I'm hoping that Fund 2 will be great, and then
yeah. Yeah.
there'll be Fund 3 and then Fund 4. But I'm very excited, I guess, on how well of a job Maxine done in advocating for Australian startups here and
Mm,
in US, but
mm,
also pre-seed, which is the hardest stage, I think, to raise money at.
definitely. Definitely.
And I'm very excited to see the community that she's building through that process. And
Yeah.
I know it's in a name
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
ventures, but
Absolutely.
I haven't until I joined, I didn't really appreciate how big of a network well, not a single, it's a team of several people, but how big of a network that team can have provided they cultivate it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Well, you've been great, Alexey. I've really enjoyed hearing the business building and the scaling. I think it's been super insightful. I think that the listeners would agree. If any of them have any questions or want to reach out and get in touch, is that something you're open to?
Yeah, sure. My LinkedIn is always open. I don't know what percentage of your audience will reach out, but I'll try to respond to all of them.
Well, I'll put all the links in the episode notes. But thanks again for coming on this show.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Alexey. Thanks for listening to the CFO Track. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. I'll see you next time.